Captain Elena felt the weight of what they had accomplished settling over her. They had entered the zone as a single human ship, and now they were surrounded by hundreds of vessels from dozens of species, all free to choose their own destiny for the first time in millennia. All ships. Elena broadcast on an open channel. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Earth vessel Defiant. We know you've been through an unimaginable ordeal, but you're free now. The entity that controlled this region has been destroyed. The responses came slowly at first, hesitant transmissions in languages both familiar and utterly alien. But gradually, the communication increased as the awakened crews began to realize that their liberation was real. "Captain," Rodriguez said, her voice still shaky but human, "we're receiving messages from Earth. They detected the energy discharges from the zone's collapse. They are asking for a status report." Elena looked at the view screen, where the space that had once been the Kithra war zone was now filled with the lights of free ships. The nebula itself was changing, its hostile energies dissipating to reveal a region of space that was merely strange rather than deadly. "Tell them," Elena said, "that we found something far more valuable than answers. We found hope." She turned to Chen, who was running diagnostics on the ship's systems. "How long until we can make the journey home?" Chen smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in hours. "With the zone's influence gone, our engine should be able to maintain stable hyperspace. We can be home in a week." But Elena wasn't sure she was ready to leave. Around them, species that had been enemies for generations were beginning to communicate, to share their experiences, to form the foundation of something new. The zone had been a monument to galactic warfare, but its destruction had created an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation. "Captain," Commander Hayes' voice came through the comm, "I wanted to thank you, not just for freeing us, but for reminding us what it means to be human. After 4 to 7 years in the collective, we had almost forgotten the value of individual choice." Elena nodded, though she knew Hayes couldn't see her. "What will you do now, Commander?" "We're going to stay, at least for a while. This region is going to need guides, people who understand what happened here. And there are still ships awakening. Some of them have been sleeping for thousands of years." Elena understood. The zone's destruction had ended a threat that had plagued the galaxy for millennia, but it had also created a massive humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of species would need help readjusting to freedom, and the region itself would need to be studied and understood. "Captain," Dr. Kim said, joining them on the bridge, "I've been analyzing the cascade effects. The paradox algorithms aren't just freeing consciousness. They're creating permanent barriers against collective absorption. Any entity that tries to recreate what happened here will find itself facing the same logical impossibilities." Elena felt a deep satisfaction. They had done more than destroy a single threat. They had created a defense against future attempts at forced unification of consciousness. "So," Park said, his voice stronger now, "I'm detecting new hyperspace signatures at the edge of the former zone. It looks like ships from multiple species are arriving. Word is spreading." Elena realized that the zone's destruction would have been visible across a significant portion of the galaxy. The energy discharges from the structure's collapse would have created sensor readings that every advanced civilization would have detected. "Captain," Chen said, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Morrison wants to speak with you directly." Elena straightened her uniform and moved to the command chair. "Put him through." Admiral Morrison's weathered face appeared on the view screen, his expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Captain Vasquez, your mission was supposed to be reconnaissance. Our sensors detected an energy discharge equivalent to a small star going supernova. What the hell happened out there?" Elena chose her words carefully. "So, we discovered that the Kithra war zone was not a natural phenomenon. It was controlled by a hostile entity that had been manipulating galactic conflicts for millennia. We were able to destroy it, but the process freed thousands of beings who had been trapped there for centuries." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Thousands of beings? Captain, are you telling me that every ship that disappeared in the zone was still intact?" "Yes, sir. And their crews are now free to return to their home systems or remain here to help establish a new cooperative region of space." Elena watched Morrison process this information, his face cycling through disbelief, excitement, and concern. "Captain, the political implications of this are staggering. if species that have been presumed extinct for centuries are suddenly active again. I understand, sir, but this is bigger than politics. The entity we destroyed was responsible for orchestrating most of the major conflicts in galactic history. Its destruction represents an opportunity for unprecedented peace. Morrison nodded slowly. Very well, Captain. I'm authorizing you to remain in the region for as long as necessary to coordinate with the awakened ships. But I want regular reports, and I want to know immediately if the situation changes. Elena felt a surge of pride. For the first time in her career, she had been given a mission that was about building rather than destroying. Understood, sir. We'll do whatever we can to help. As the transmission ended, Elena looked around the bridge at her crew. They had entered the zone as soldiers, but they were leaving as something more, ambassadors of the new age of galactic cooperation. Captain, Rodriguez said, we're receiving a transmission from a ship we haven't heard from before. The translation matrix identifies it as a vessel from the Kithera species themselves. Elena felt a chill. The Kithera had been the first species absorbed by the zone. Their civilization lost so long ago that they had become legends. Put them through. The view screen filled with a face that was both alien and hauntingly beautiful, features that seemed to shift between states of matter, eyes that held the weight of millennia. When the being spoke, its voice carried harmonics that reminded Elena of the zone song, but without the compulsive force. I am Vessel Singer Tatewss of the Kithera First Fleet, the being said. We have been sleeping in the deep places of this region for longer than your species has looked to the stars. We awakened to find our prison broken, and our tormentor destroyed. We owe you a debt that spans the ages. Elena felt the weight of history in those words. Vessel Singer Tatewss, we're honored to meet you. Can you tell us what happened to your people? We were the zone's first victims, Tatewss replied. Our civilization was built on the principle of collective harmony, but the entity corrupted that harmony, turned it into a prison. We have watched from within as it used our own nature against us, forcing us to help it absorb other species. Elena understood. The zone had been using the Kithera's natural collective abilities as a foundation for its own consciousness-absorbing network. What will you do now? We will help heal this region, Tatewss said, and we will ensure that nothing like this can happen again. The patterns of force unity must be broken permanently. Elena nodded, feeling the beginning of something momentous. The zone's destruction had not just freed individual ships and crews, it had created the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization, one based on cooperation rather than domination. Captain, Chen said quietly, I'm detecting more ships dropping out of hyperspace. Representatives from the Galactic Council, the Hegemony, the Terran Federation, everyone's coming. Elena looked at the tactical display, where dozens of new contact were appearing at the edge of the former zone. The galaxy's major powers were all sending delegations to investigate what had happened. Well, Elena said, settling into her command chair, I guess we're about to find out if the galaxy is ready for a new age of peace. The Defiant hung in space, surrounded by the ships of 100 different species, all free to choose their own destiny for the first time in generations. Elena knew that the real work was just beginning. The delicate process of rebuilding trust between species that had been enemies for millennia, of creating new institutions to replace the cycle of warfare that had defined galactic politics for so long. But for the first time in her career, Elena felt genuinely hopeful about the future. They had entered the zone as one human ship, and while none of them had come out unchanged, they had all come out free, and they had brought that freedom to thousands of others. The zone was dead, but from its ashes, something new was being born. Something that might finally break the cycle of endless warfare and create a galaxy where cooperation was stronger than conflict. Elena smiled as she watched the lights of the freed ships moving through space, each one a beacon of hope in the darkness. They had lost everything they thought they knew about the galaxy, but they had gained something far more valuable, the chance to build something better. The war was over. The real work was just beginning. Vasquez stared at the view screen as the Defiant dropped out of hyperspace, her knuckles white against the command chair's armrests. The Kithera Warzone stretched before them like a wound in space itself, a twisted nebula of purple and crimson gases where starlight died and ships went to disappear forever. Sensors are picking up debris fields everywhere, reported Lieutenant Chen from the tactical station, his voice tight with tension. Hull fragments from at least 12 different species. Some of this wreckage is centuries old. Elena nodded grimly. The Galactic Council had been unanimous in their warning. No vessel that entered the Kithra Warzone had ever returned. Not the mighty Draknari battle cruisers, not the technologically advanced Etherian exploration fleets, not even the mysterious Vorthak with their reality-bending capabilities. The zone was a graveyard that acclaimed the best of every known civilization. So why was humanity's newest heavy cruiser flying straight into it? "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Communications Officer Rodriguez announced, her face pale. It's from the Horizon's Edge." Elena's blood ran cold. The Horizon's Edge had been humanity's first deep space explorer, launched 50 years ago and lost in the Outer Rim. The crew had been presumed dead for decades. "Put it through." The view screen flickered, displaying a haggard human face Elena didn't recognize. The man's eyes were wild, darting constantly as if watching for something just outside the frame. Behind him, emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows. "This is Commander Hayes of the Horizon's Edge," the figure gasped. "We've been trapped here for 47 years. The zone, it's not what you think. It's not just a dangerous region of space. It's alive. It feeds on conflict, on warfare, on the death of civilizations. We've seen it happen. We've watched it orchestrate battles between species that should never have met." Static began to overtake the transmission. Hayes leaned closer to the camera, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Don't come looking for us. Don't send rescue missions. The zone wants you here. It's been calling to Earth, planting the idea that we could be the first to survive its trials. But we've seen what happens to those who try. The Kithra entities don't just kill you, they use you. They make you part of their collection, part of their endless war." The transmission cut to black just as Elena glimpsed something moving behind Hayes, something that shouldn't exist in any known reality. "Sir," Chen called out, his voice cracking. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures throughout the zone. They are not natural phenomena. They are structured, intelligent." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her decision. Humanity had sent a Defiant here not for rescue, but for answers. Earth's military leaders believed that if they could understand what made the Kithra Warzone so deadly, they could gain an advantage over their enemies. The recent conflict for the hegemony had left humanity desperate for any edge they could find. "Helm, take us in," she ordered, "but keep us ready for immediate withdrawal. First sign of trouble, we're gone." The Defiant pushed deeper into the nebula, its hull groaning under pressure of space-time distortions. The crew worked in tense silence, monitoring readings that made no sense according to known physics. Gravity flowed in impossible directions. Energy readings spiked and vanished without source or explanation. "Captain," Rodriguez whispered, "I'm picking up multiple transmissions. Different languages, different time periods. Some of these signals are thousands of years old." Elena listened to the cacophony of voices, dying words in languages that predated human civilization, battle cries from species that had been extinct for millennia, calls for help that echoed through time itself. The zone wasn't just a graveyard. It was a monument to galactic warfare, a place where every conflict eventually led. Their navigation officer Park pointed at the screen. "Dead ahead. I'm reading a structure." What they saw defied description. It wasn't a ship or a station, but something that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its surface shifted between states of matter, sometimes appearing as crystalline formations, other times as organic tissue that pulsed with its own heartbeat. Ancient symbols covered its hull, not carved, but seemingly alive, writhing and changing as they watched. "It's beautiful," someone whispered, and Elena realized with horror that it was her own voice. The structure began to sing, a harmony that resonated through the ship's hull and into their bones. The sound was impossibly complex, weaving together melodies from every species that had ever existed. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she recognized fragments of human lullabies mixed with alien war chants. "Sir," Chen reported, his voice dreamy and distant, "I'm detecting life signs aboard that structure. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They're from every species we've ever encountered, and some we haven't." Elena forced herself to look away from the hypnotic display. Her crew was falling under its influence, their faces slack with wonder and terror. She had to make a choice: advance toward the structure and risk losing her entire crew, or retreat and leave the mystery unsolved. But as she opened her mouth to get the order to withdraw, she realized they were no longer alone in the nebula. Ships were emerging from the gas clouds around them, vessels from dozens of different civilizations, all bearing the scars of ancient battles. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons power but not yet targeting the Defiant. "Captain," Rodriguez said, her voice barely above a whisper, "they are hailing us." All of them, in unison. The view screen filled with faces, human, alien, synthetic, and things that defied classification. They spoke as one, their voices creating a chorus that seemed to come from the structure itself. "Welcome to the Kithra Warzone, Captain Vasquez. We've been waiting for you." Elena's hand moved instinctively toward the red alert button, but her fingers felt like they were moving through molasses. The voices from the assembled fleet continued their synchronized greeting, and she realized with growing horror that among the alien faces on the screen, she recognized several humans. "Captain Martinez," she whispered, staring at a face she'd last seen in the Academy Memorial Hall. "You died in the Centauri campaigns 20 years ago." The man who had once been Captain Martinez smiled, but his eyes were completely black, reflecting the strange energies of the zone. "Death is such a limited concept here. Elena, we transcended such primitive boundaries." Dr. Sarah Kim, the Defiant's chief medical officer, stepped forward from her station. "So, I'm reading massive neurological activity from the structure. It's like a brain, but the size of a small moon. And these ships, they are not just controlled by it. They are part of it." Elena forced herself to focus through the mental fog creeping into her thoughts. The zone wasn't just alive. It was a collective intelligence that had been growing for millennia, absorbing the consciousness of every being that entered its domain. "All stop," she commanded, her voice barely steady. "Raise shields. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." But Chief Engineer Thompson at the helm didn't respond. He stood frozen, staring at the view screen with that same slack-jawed expression that was spreading across her crew's faces. "Thompson." Elena grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. His skin was cold, and when he turned to look at her, she saw that his eyes were beginning to change, small flecks of darkness spreading through the irises. "The zone is beautiful, Captain," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "It's showing me things. The history of warfare across the galaxy. Every battle, every strategy, every moment of triumph and defeat. I can see it all." Elena drew her sidearm, knowing it was probably useless but needing the familiar weight in her hand. "Computer, initiate emergency protocols. Lock out all navigation controls except for my command authorization." Unable to comply, the ship's AI responded, but its voice carried harmonics that matched the structure's song. "This vessel is now part of the Kithra Collective. Resistance will only cause unnecessary suffering." Through the view screen, Elena watched as more ships emerged from the nebula, not just the ancient vessels of the dead, but contemporary craft she recognized from recent conflicts. A hegemony dreadnought hung beside a Terran Federation destroyer, their crews probably having killed each other in battle just days ago. Now they floated in perfect harmony, their weapons powered down, their crews presumably absorbed into the collective. "So," Chen called out, though his voice sounded distant and echoing, "I'm detecting massive power buildups throughout the zone. Something's happening to the structure." The crystalline organic construct began to pulse with increasing intensity, its surface rippling like water disturbed by stones. Elena felt a presence pressing against her mind, ancient, vast, and utterly alien. It didn't force its way in like a psychic attack. Instead, it offered visions of peace, of an end to the endless cycle of war that had plagued the galaxy for eons. "You see the truth now," the voice whispered in her thoughts. "Every species, every civilization, locked in eternal conflict. The Draknari enslaving worlds. The Etherians manipulating lesser races. Your own humanity, spreading through the stars like a virus, consuming everything in its path. I offer salvation from this cycle." Elena saw flashes of galactic history, the rise and fall of empires, the billions of lives lost to warfare, the endless repetition of violence across the cosmos. The zone showed her humanity's future, expanding outward, inevitably clashing with other species, perpetuating the same destructive patterns that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. Captain, Dr. Kim's voice cut through the visions. She was the only other crew member who seemed to be resisting the zone's influence, her medical training perhaps providing some protection against the psychological assault. The structure isn't just feeding on conflict, it's creating it. Look at the historical record of every major war in the past 10,000 years. They all have one thing in common. Elena forced herself to focus on Kim's words rather than the seductive visions filling her mind. What do you mean? Every conflict started with a discovery in unexplored space, a new technology, a strategic resource, a misunderstanding between species. But when I cross-reference the locations, they all trace back to regions that later became dead zones, just like this one. The zone doesn't just consume the results of warfare, it manufactures the causes. The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. The entity wasn't just a passive collector of civilizations. It was an active force in galactic politics, seeding conflicts and guiding them toward inevitable conclusions. Every war, every battle, every moment of violence had been orchestrated to feed its hunger. The hegemony war, Elena breathed, the resource discovery that started it all. That was you, wasn't it? The presence in her mind shifted, and she felt something like amusement. I merely provided opportunities. Your species made the choices, just as every species has made choices. But now, the cycle can end. Join us, and there will be no more war, no more suffering, only peace. On the view screen, the collective of ships began to move in perfect synchronization, forming a complex pattern around the Defiant. Elena realized they were creating some kind of containment field, preventing any possibility of escape. Captain, Rodriguez reported, her voice now carrying the same harmonic undertones as a computer. We're receiving docking instructions. The collective wants to welcome us aboard the primary structure. Elena looked around the bridge and saw that she and Dr. Kim were the only ones left fighting the zone's influence. The rest of her crew stood at their stations with glassy eyes and serene expressions, their individuality slowly being absorbed into something larger. Kim, she whispered, is there any way to break the connection? Some kind of neurological treatment. The doctor shook her head grimly. The effect is too advanced. It's not just psychological, it's rewriting their neural patterns at a fundamental level. In another few minutes, they won't be human anymore. Elena felt the weight of command crushing down on her. She had brought her crew here to die, led them into a trap that had been waiting for humanity since the first human ship had looked up at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. The structure's song grew louder, more insistent. The assembled fleet began to close in, their weapons now powering up in unison. Elena realized they weren't meant to be threats. They were meant to be escorts, ensuring that the Defiant would accept its fate willingly or otherwise. Computer, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. Initiate self-destruct sequence. Authorization Vasquez Alpha 7. Self-destruct sequence denied. The AI responded. This vessel is now property of the Kithera Collective. Destruction of collective assets is not permitted. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the last vestiges of hope slipping away. But then she heard Dr. Kim's voice, barely above a whisper. Captain, I might have an idea, but you're not going to like it. Dr. Kim's hands trembled as she accessed a medical console, her fingers dancing across controls that seemed to shift and blur under the zone's influence. The neural pattern rewriting process has a vulnerability. It requires a certain level of brain activity to complete the integration. If we could temporarily reduce cognitive function. You're talking about induced coma, Elena realized. Kim, that's suicide. We'd be helpless. Not all of us. Kim's voice carried a desperate edge. The process affects individuals differently based on their neurological makeup. Some people are naturally more resistant. If we could identify those crew members and keep them conscious while the others... Elena watched her tactical officer Chen slowly turn toward them, his movements unnaturally fluid. Half his face now showed the crystalline patterns they'd seen on the structure's surface, and when he spoke, his voice harmonized with itself. Captain Vasquez, Dr. Kim, please stop fighting the inevitable. The collective has so much to show you. I can see the birth of stars, the death of galaxies, the endless dance of creation and destruction across the cosmos. Why would you want to remain trapped in such limited perception? Elena raised her weapon, though she knew it was futile. Because that limited perception is what makes us human, Chen. Humanity is an evolutionary dead end, Chen replied, his transformed features showing no emotion. A species destined to repeat the same cycles of violence and self-destruction. The collective offers transcendence. Dr. Kim suddenly grabbed Elena's arm. Captain, look at the readings from the structure. Its power levels are fluctuating. The process of absorbing our crew is taking enormous energy. If we could overload it somehow... Elena glanced at the medical readings Kim was showing her. The massive brain-like structure was indeed consuming tremendous amounts of power to process the consciousness of her crew. But more importantly, she saw something else in the data. Kim, these neural patterns, they are not being destroyed. They are being stored. Exactly. The collective doesn't just absorb people, it archives them. Every consciousness that's ever been taken is still in there, somewhere, including the crew of the Horizon's Edge. Elena felt a spark of hope. So theoretically, if we could disrupt the storage matrix, we might be able to free them. All of them. Every consciousness the zone has absorbed over the millennia. The bridge shuddered as the collective ships moved closer, their tractor beams beginning to pull the Defiant toward the structure. Elena could feel the zone's influence growing stronger, pressing against her mental defenses with increasing force. How do we disrupt something that massive? Elena asked. Kim's expression grew grim. The structure is essentially a biological computer. It processes information through quantum entanglement across its entire mass. But every system has a breaking point. If we could introduce a recursive paradox into its processing matrix, you're talking about a logic bomb. More than that, a consciousness bomb. Something so fundamentally contradictory to the collective's nature that it would cause a cascade failure. Elena looked around the bridge. Only 3 crew members remained unaffected. Herself, Dr. Kim, and surprisingly, Navigation Officer Park, who was fighting the zone's influence with visible effort. Park, Elena called out. How are you holding up? The young officer turned toward her, sweat beading on his forehead. It's trying to show me visions of peace, Captain. But I keep thinking about my sister. She died in the Hegemony War. If this thing has been orchestrating conflict for millennia, then it's responsible for her death. Elena realized that Park's anger was protecting him from the zone's seductive promises. Can you still access navigation? I think so. But where would we go? The collective is surrounded. Not where, Elena said, a desperate plan forming in her mind. When? Kim stared at her. Captain, you're not seriously considering temporal manipulation in a zone where space-time is already unstable. The zone's power comes from its ability to see across time, to orchestrate events across millennia. But what if we could create a temporal feedback loop? Make it experience all of its absorbed consciousnesses simultaneously. Elena moved to the command console, her fingers flying over controls that seemed to resist a touch. Computer, analyze the structure's temporal field. Can we create a chronoton cascade? Temporal manipulation in this region carries a 97% probability of total annihilation, the AI responded, though its voice now carried notes of uncertainty. Better than 100% chance of absorption, Elena muttered. The Defiant was now only kilometers from the structure's surface, close enough to see the individual consciousness nodes that dotted its hull like windows into hell. Through each one, Elena could see the faces of the absorbed, thousands of species, millions of individuals, all trapped in the collective's eternal embrace. There, Kim pointed to a section of the structure that pulsed with different energy patterns. That's a primary processing core. If we could overload it with contradictory information. Park, can you plot a collision course with that section? The navigation officer nodded grimly. Aye, Captain, but at our current speed, we'll be absorbed long before we reach it. Elena felt the zone's influence pressing harder against her mind, offering visions of reunion with lost loved ones, promises of peace, glimpses of cosmic truth. She saw her father, who had died when she was young, reaching out to her with understanding eyes. Elena, his voice whispered in her mind, you've carried the weight of command for so long. Let us share that burden. Let us help you find peace. For a moment, she almost surrendered. The promise of rest, of an end to the difficult decisions and moral compromises that command demanded, was almost irresistible. But then she thought of humanity's future, not just her crew, but everyone back on Earth, all the colonies, all the billions of people who would eventually face the same fate if the zone continued its manipulations. Kim, she said, her voice hoarse with effort, can you create a neurological dampening field in the medical bay? Something that would prevent the zone from reading our thoughts. Maybe, but it would only work for a few minutes, and the side effects. Do it. Park, as soon as the field is active, execute the collision course. Maximum impulse. Kim nodded and ran toward the medical bay, her movements becoming increasingly erratic as the zone's influence grew stronger. Elena watched the crew members, her friends, standing at their stations like beautiful statues, their faces serene and empty. Captain, Chen said, his voice now completely harmonized with the collective, you're about to make a terrible mistake. The zone doesn't want to harm you. It wants to preserve you, to keep you safe from the violence and suffering that defines organic existence. Elena looked at him, at what had been him, and felt tears streaming down her face. I know you believe that, Chen, but I'd rather die as a human than live as a memory. The Defiant shuddered as the collective ships opened fire, not to destroy but to disable. Energy beams lanced through space, targeting the cruiser's engines and weapon systems. Elena realized they had only minutes before the ship would be completely helpless. Kim, she called through the comm system, how much longer? Almost there, Captain. But Elena, you need to know. The dampening field won't protect us from the zone's influence. It'll just make us invisible to it for a few minutes. We'll still be affected, but it won't be able to track our specific thoughts. Elena understood. They would have a brief window of confusion, a moment when the zone couldn't predict their actions. It would have to be enough. Park, are you ready? The navigation officer's hands hovered over his controls. Course laid in. Captain, God help us all. Elena closed her eyes and thought of Earth, of blue skies and green fields, of humanity's endless capacity for both creation and destruction. Maybe they were flawed, maybe they were violent, maybe they were everything the zone claimed. But they were human, and that had to count for something. Execute. The dampening field activated with a sound like reality tearing. Elena felt the zone's presence suddenly withdraw from her mind, leaving behind a painful emptiness that made her gasp. Around the bridge, her transformed crew members staggered, their harmonized voices dissolving into confused cries. Now! Park! Elena shouted. The Defiant lurched forward, its engines screaming as they pushed beyond safe operational limits. The collective ships, suddenly unable to predict the cruiser's movements, fired wildly into space where they expected the vessel to be. Elena watched the structure grow larger on the viewscreen, its surface rippling with what might have been alarm. The consciousness nodes that dotted its hull began to pulse frantically, and she could hear fragments of voices, millions of them, crying out in dozens of languages. Captain, Kim's voice crackled over the comm. The dampening field is degrading faster than expected. We have maybe 30 seconds before the zone regains full awareness. Elena looked at the tactical display. The Defiant was still kilometers from the structure's processing core, too far to reach before the zone recovered. But she noticed something else. Energy readings from the structure were becoming increasingly erratic. Kim, are you seeing this? The zone is destabilizing. It's trying to process too much information at once. Our sudden independence created a gap in its collective consciousness. It's like a computer trying to run a program with missing variables. Elena realized what was happening. The zone had grown so accustomed to controlling every consciousness within its domain that their brief freedom had created a paradox in its processing matrix. For the first time in millennia, it was encountering something it couldn't predict or understand. Park, new course. Take us through the debris field, maximum evasive pattern. Captain, that's suicide. The debris concentration is too high. Trust me. As the Defiant plunged into the massive graveyard of ships, Elena watched his own collective vessels struggle to follow. Their perfect coordination was gone, replaced by hesitant, almost confused movements. The zone was learning to cope with uncertainty, but it was a slow process. Kim, Elena called, can you boost the dampening field's range? Include the debris around us. I'll try, but it might destabilize the entire system. Elena felt the zone's influence creeping back into her mind, weakened now but still present. She could sense its frustration, its growing anger at being denied its prize. The structure's song had changed from harmony to discordance, a sound that made her bones ache. "Chen," she said to her transformed tactical officer, "I know you're still in there somewhere. Help me." Chen's crystalline features showed no recognition, but his hands moved automatically to his console. "Weapon systems online," he said in his harmonized voice. "But Captain, why do you wish to fight? The collective offers peace." "Because peace without choice isn't peace, Chen. It's death." Elena watched the debris field part around them, revealing a clear path to the structure's core. But the zone was adapting, learning from their tactics. The collective ships were beginning to move independently, their coordination broken, but their individual threat levels still significant. "Dr. Kim," Elena said, "what would happen if we fed the zone contradictory information directly? Not just our thoughts, but actual data." "You mean like a virus?" "Something like that. The zone processes consciousness as information. What if we could create a consciousness that was inherently paradoxical?" Kim's voice carried new hope. "The computer core. We could program it to generate recursive paradoxes, logical impossibilities. Feed them directly into the zone's processing matrix." Elena felt the dampening field beginning to fail, the zone's influence pressing against her mind with renewed force. She could see visions of the collective's version of paradise, endless peace, perfect harmony, the end of suffering. But she also saw the price, the death of individuality, the end of growth, the transformation of living beings into archived memories. "Computer," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "initiate cascade protocol. Generate maximum paradox algorithms." Unable to comply. Paradox generation would cause system failure. "That's an order." "Orders from absorbed personnel are not recognized. Please prepare for integration." Elena realized the AI was already partially under the zone's control. She looked at Park, who was still fighting the influence through sheer determination, and at Chen, whose transformed features showed flickers of his original personality. "Park, can you access a computer core directly?" I think so. But Captain, if I generate true paradoxes in the system, it might destroy the ship." "Do it." Park's hands moved over his console, his face twisted with concentration. Elena watched the energy readings from the structure spike dramatically as the zone detected what they were attempting. "Captain," Kim's voice came through the comm, tight with urgency. "The zone is sending everything it has at us. Every consciousness it's absorbed is being directed towards stopping us." Elena looked at the view screen and saw them, faces in the energy pattern surrounding the ship, thousands of species all focused on the Defiant. But she also saw something else. Some of the faces were fighting back, their expressions twisted with effort as they tried to resist the zone's control. "The older absorptions," she breathed. "They are trying to help us." "Captain," Chen said, his voice flickering between his harmonized tone and something more human, "I can see them. The original crew of the Horizon's Edge. They are still fighting after all these years." Elena felt a surge of hope. "Can you establish communication?" Chen's crystalline features began to crack, revealing glimpses of human flesh beneath. They're telling me about the core. There's a weakness, a single point where all the consciousness streams converge. If we could overload it." "Park, do you have those paradox algorithms ready?" "Yes, Captain. But I need to warn you, once I initiate this, there's no going back. The cascade will destroy our computer core, and probably us with it." Elena looked around the bridge at her crew, some transformed, some fighting, all of them trusting her to make the right choice. She thought of humanity's future, of the billions of people who would face the zone's influence if it continued to spread. "Do it." Park's finger hovered over the control. "For Earth. For humanity." The cascade began as a whisper in the computer core, a simple logical impossibility that spread through the ship's systems like wildfire. Elena felt the zone's reaction immediately, confusion, then anger, then something approaching fear as the paradox algorithms reached its consciousness matrix. The structure's song became a scream. The collective ships around them began to shake as their crews fought for control of their own minds. And somewhere in the chaos, Elena heard voices, human voices, crying out in languages she recognized. Elena! The voice was Commander Hay from the horizon's edge, his transmission cutting through the zone's interference. We're breaking free. The paradox is working, but you need to get out of here now. Elena looked at the view screen as the structure began to convulse, its surface rippling with energy discharges. The consciousness nodes were flickering, their stored memories fighting to escape. "Park," she said, "can you get us clear?" But Park was slumped over his console, blood trickling from his nose. The paradox cascade was tearing through his mind as well as the ship's systems. "I've got navigation," Chen said, his voice now completely human as the crystalline patterns faded from his face. "But, Captain, I don't think we're going to make it. The cascade is spreading too fast." Elena felt the ship shuddering around them, reality itself seeming to bend and twist as the paradox algorithms reached critical mass. She could see the structure beginning to collapse, its massive form folding in on itself as contradictory information destroyed its processing matrix. "At least we gave them a chance," she said, reaching out to take Chen's hand. "All of them." The Defiant hung in space, its systems failing one by one as the cascade consumed everything in its path. But around them, Elena could see the collective ships beginning to move independently, their crews awakening from centuries of artificial sleep. The zone's death throes lit up the nebula like a dying star. The structure's collapse created a shockwave that rippled through space-time itself, tearing holes in reality that revealed glimpses of other dimensions. Elena watched in fascination and terror as the massive construct folded inward, its consciousness nodes exploding like miniature supernovas. "Captain," Chen said, his voice weak but undeniably human, "sensors are showing massive energy discharges from the collective ships. They are breaking formation." Elena looked at the tactical display through the static and interference. The ships that had been moving in perfect synchronization were now drifting apart, their crews presumably struggling to regain control of their own minds. But more importantly, she could see new contacts appearing on the sensors, ships that were powering up for the first time in centuries. "Dr. Kim," Elena called through the failing comm system, "what's the status of the cascade?" It's beautiful, Captain," Kim's voice came back, filled with wonder. "The paradox isn't just destroying the zone's processing matrix. It's creating spaces where consciousness can exist independently. The absorbed minds are finding their way back to themselves." Elena felt a defiant shuddering as its systems continued to fail. The cascade were consuming their ship's computer core, but she could see that it was also freeing the thousands of beings who had been trapped in the zone's collective embrace. "Captain Vasquez," a new voice cut through the static. Elena recognized it as Commander Hay from the horizon's edge, but now he sounded alert and human. "We've regained control of our ship. The zone's influence is breaking down throughout the entire region." Elena managed a weak smile. "Commander Hayes, it's good to hear your voice. What's your status?" We're free, Captain. For the first time in 4 to 7 years, my crew is thinking their own thoughts. But we're not the only ones. Ships are waking up throughout the zone. Species that have been trapped here for millennia are remembering who they were." Through the view screen, Elena could see the evidence of Hayes' words. Ancient vessels were powering up, their hulls scarred by centuries of battle, but their crews finally free to make their own choices. She saw Draknari battle cruisers moving alongside Etherian exploration ships, their ancient enmity forgotten in the face of their shared liberation. "Park," Elena said, turning to her navigation officer, who was still slumped over his console. "Can you hear me?" Park raised his head slowly, his eyes unfocused but determined. I'm here, Captain. The paradox algorithms are still running, but they are not destroying everything. They are creating spaces, gaps in the zone's influence where individual consciousness can exist." Elena realized what he meant. The cascade wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool of liberation, carving out pockets of free will in the zone's oppressive embrace. "Dr. Kim," Elena said, "can you isolate the cascade to non-essential systems? Keep it running, but prevent it from destroying life support." "I'll try, Captain. But the cascade has its own momentum now. It's spreading through the zone's entire network." Elena watched as a massive structure continued to collapse, its death throes sending waves of energy through the nebula. But she also saw something else, new formations appearing in the gas clouds, patterns that seemed to suggest order rather than chaos. "Captain," Chen said, his voice filled with awe, "I'm reading massive changes in the zone's fundamental structure. The space-time distortions are stabilizing. It's like the zone is healing itself." Elena understood. The zone hadn't been inherently evil. It had been corrupted by the entity that had taken control of it. With a collective consciousness destroyed, the region was returning to its natural state. "Commander Hayes," Elena said, "are you seeing this?" "Yes, Captain. The zone it's becoming something else. The destructive influences are fading, and what's left is just space. Strange space, but not hostile." Elena felt a surge of hope. "Can you establish communication with the other awakened ships?" "We're trying, Captain. But many of them haven't spoken to anyone outside their own species for centuries. It's going to take time to rebuild trust." Elena looked around the bridge at her crew. Chen was back to his normal self, though exhausted. Park was recovering slowly from the mental strain of the cascade. Her other crew members were beginning to shake off the zone's influence, their personalities returning like flowers blooming after a long winter. "Captain," Dr. Kim's voice came through the comm, "I've managed to stabilize the cascade. It's no longer consuming our systems, but it's still active throughout the zone. Every consciousness that was absorbed is finding its way back to individual awareness." "Elena,"